So you finished Sword and Shield, and
Yes.
you have many things to talk to me about. But let's get rid of the fanfare in the room first. What do you think of Dexit?
Okay. So it's rather interesting. I think that I do think that from a developer's standpoint, it is inevitable eventually. But I do think that in the context of Sword and Shield's quality, it is just slightly questionable because you would think that something like Dexit would enable, that was what Game Freak said, that it would enable a higher quality game. Now, Sword and Shield, they don't. The problem with them is that they don't build on the previous games that much, so as a result,
can we just talk about how Pokemon has never really built on the previous games that much? But that's a bit of a controversial opinion coming from a Final Fantasy player.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that in a bit later. But Sword and Shield, well, other than the wild area, the wild area is pretty much the most innovative thing about it.
The wild area is just them finally getting into more generic random encounters like like Final Fantasy has been doing for the past 15, 25 years. That's the part. That's the thing.
But I'm still saying that even though it's not technically new to other games, it's still the most innovative part about Sword and Shield. So,
you are way more forgiving to Pokemon than I am. I think that's an interesting dynamic between us. I think that, it's alright for games to do the same thing over and over again. It'd be completely hypocritical of me to say that Pokemon isn't interesting because it's the same game over and over again, when I literally just this Black Friday sale bought both of the Dragon Quest spin-off of Dynasty Warriors games. You've played one Dynasty Warriors game, you've played literally every single fucking
sets of Dynasty Warriors.
And they have no fucking real innovation.
From Dynasty Warriors 3 to 8, they're pretty much the same formula, and then you've got Hyrule Warriors.
No, Hyrule Warriors is the same as well.
Scramble.
Hyrule Warriors is the same as well. They are literally all the same.
But that's what I'm saying. You got 3 to 8, and then
all the spin-offs,
and then
all the
Hyrule
Samurai
Warriors is the same thing with the Zelda skin.
All the
there's
Samurai
Persona
Warriors.
5 Scramble coming out with a Persona skin,
Yep.
and there's probably about 5 others.
All the Samurai Warriors games, which are just the Dynasty Warriors games with a Samurai Warrior skin. There's the Warriors Orochi games, which are a spin-off because they're both Dynasty Warriors and Samurai Warriors, but they're set in a split timeline fucking bullshit world. There's the Berserk one, there's the One Piece one, there's one based on, I think, it's an anime, I have it. It's Aslam
So
or
they've done
Aslam
some
or
on
something.
some anime. That's pretty interesting.
They have done dozens and dozens of these games, and they are all the same. And there's Dragon Quest ones, like I just said I bought. And they are all the same. They are all games where you hack and slash
They
thousands
have the same foundation. They just have different coats of paint on them.
Exactly. Pokemon doesn't even have the different coats of paint. They're all just Pokemon games. But
The thing with Pokemon is, they do have changes. They're just, they just don't mess with the core idea of it. But there is, so that's where we differ a little bit.
You could say the Dynasty Warriors does have that as well, right? It's in the same way as a brand new innovation for Dynasty Warriors is a whole new tier of weapons or something something overly minuscule like that. A whole new difficulty level.
I'd imagine they'd make something like an addition that complements the already existing mechanics. It just doesn't overhaul the already existing mechanics.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, you're still going to be plot on a battlefield with 1,000 fucking mooks that you can kill in one hit.
Yeah.
And about 12 to 16 enemies that take at least 5.
And in Pokemon, you can... A person who's played Sword and Shield can probably pick up Pokemon Red and Blue with little difficulty because it plays very similarly, except just with much crappier graphics and much less streamlining.
Yeah, exactly.
So Sword and Shield. So back to Dexit. So Sword and Shield, it's basically, in a nutshell, another conservative iteration of the Pokemon series that it's always been, except that even though, because you'd think, well, definitely at least up to Gen 5, Pokemon has just gotten slightly broader, slightly better for every tiny baby step it takes. And Dexit kind of counteracts that, and so it kind of makes Dexit a bit of it doesn't, the context around it doesn't make it seem a worthwhile sacrifice.
Well, so my issue with Dexit is that if they had stuck to the argument that they made, I would have been completely alright with it. You know, the amount of workload that would have been that comes with reimagining 800 already existing Pokemon as well as creating a new 150. But they didn't reimagine them. There's definitive proof online that they have ripped off the models from the original 3DS, the 3DS
so
games.
It's pretty obvious that if you play Sword and Shield that they use basically an upgraded and upscaled version of the engine that the 3DS games use. So the battles have that, the animations, like, you know how you can tell the feel of a game that you know if it uses the same engine just by
absolutely.
the way things animate.
Dynasty
it has
Warriors.
that same feel as the 3DS games, just upscaled.
So Dynasty Warriors has that kind of deja vu a lot because you know how the games have like Extreme Legends re-releases and Empires re-releases, yeah? They use the same engine. It's more obvious because they aren't even trying to hide it, but like... from Dynasty Warriors 4 to Dynasty Warriors 5, you can tell it's the same engine. You can tell it's the exact same engine. It just plays smoother and prettier.
They just upgraded it a bit to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Sword and Shield, it's basically like the 3DS engine upscaled to the Switch hardware. And so it doesn't take full advantage of the Switch. And the battles feel the same as the 3DS ones. The animations work the same, and its bad points do stick out more in Sword and Shield because it's on a console that it wasn't designed for. On the 3D, like, because the animations, you know, they're a bit wooden, like the Pokemon don't really touch each other, and it's a little bit robotic. It was fine on the 3DS because the 3DS is a limited piece of hardware. On the Switch...
I mean, I disagree with that entirely. I don't think it was fine with the 3DS. I think there's plenty of games that perfectly exemplify just how good the 3DS can be if the developers actually try to put it to the work. But each to their own.
But regardless, it does stick out more on the Switch because it's even higher potential than the 3DS.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and so if you look
the
at...
Switch can have fucking Skyrim. You're telling me these Pokemon can't move the 3 feet it takes to fucking actually make physical contact with the other Pokemon? The Switch can have Dark Souls 1, for Christ's sakes. Like, the remaster of it. Like, it's honestly unacceptable. The level of quality is honestly unacceptable.
And so...
But I'm being more hard on it than you.
Yeah, and so you got the very wooden animations, and games will be comparing to a lot with other Nintendo franchises. There's Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is the first Fire Emblem game on the Switch,
and it looks fantastic. By the way,
yeah. So I'll be talking about the methodology because I read a bit about its development as well. So I'll talk to you a bit about that. There's also, of course, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey that put their franchises on the limits of the Switch hardware.
Imagine if Mario couldn't actually make contact with any of the enemies. He just had to vibrate in place and then they died.
Well, to be fair, platform games are different in that sense. But, it's like porting Super Mario Galaxy and upscaling it to the Switch. It's kind of like what Pokemon did with Generation 7 games. And so you can feel that on the map, you can feel that in the battles, and probably the only real thing they did bring that that was sort of a real advancement in a series context, even though it's been in other game series for ages, is the wild area.
Yeah.
And the storytelling. Actually, no. I'll let you ask about the story.
No,
first.
I'm not. This is not a late night TV show interview. Just segue into whatever you need to talk about, and I'll bring up stuff I want to talk about as well. Like, just.
Well, okay. How about I talk about the wild area, because I think, like, overall to the series, it is a good thing they brought it.
Oh yeah.
But they could have done much more with it. It's a welcome thing but it's what you want more of that they haven't brought in.
Yeah.
So, with the wild area, you can So you've probably seen footage of it, right?
Yeah,
It's
the most footage I've seen is like funny Twitter videos of like the Pokemon running after you at like crazy speeds. Like,
oh yeah, so I'll talk about the Pokemon encounters. Other than the wild area, probably the best thing that Sword and Shield does is the streamlining and rationalizing of certain things in its mechanics. So, for instance, the one thing they brought in from the Let's Go games, the ones where you just catch the Pokemon like in Pokemon Go, the Pokemon are just like around in the overworld now, so you just touch them instead of going into the grass and having random encounters.
yeah.
I think that is a better system than the random encounter system, so props to them for that. But it kind of actually has elements of both, because sometimes when you're just in the grass and you're not touching a Pokemon, you can
Also pull a random encounter.
well, almost, because an exclamation mark points up, and if you keep walking into the exclamation mark, then you go into a random encounter. But I think you can walk away from the exclamation mark if you don't want to. So if you're careful about it, it's entirely possible to not run into an encounter you don't want to go into. So that's good. And so in the wild area, it's the same thing. So you have the Pokemon walking around, although that does have its limits too, because you can't quite feel immersed when you have just Pokemon popping out of the grass and then they walk around. Like, you don't quite get, like, say, Machoke just lifting rocks in the wilderness and then running into one, like you might see in some other games. And then, like other Pokemon like Wingull, where they just float because that's just how its model animation in battles is. So it like moves around on an axis and then it looks like it's floating, so it's a bit weird.
Yeah,
so it has its limits like that, but you know, at least it's not the random encounter system.
It shouldn't. That shouldn't be a limit. I'm sorry. That having a flying animation.
I'm just giving it credits for the Pokemon context over. I'm not saying that it's enough.
Not having a flying animation on your flying Pokemon.
Like with a lot of flying Pokemon, they don't. Like one thing they probably could have implemented rather easily is with a lot of bird Pokemon, you could have them walking around on the ground and then have them take off and then fly to another place and land.
Yeah.
But you don't have that. You just have them moving around like ground-based Pokemon. They just have a flying animation. So yeah, in the presentation side, it does have that very wooden feel about it. And so with Dexit actually. Have you learned a lot about the Pokemon that were cut from the Pokedex?
I didn't specifically. Why would I?
Well, yeah, fair enough. So one thing you'll find funny is that with the Kanto starters, Charizard, the Charizard line was the only one that made it in.
Of
the Kanto starters.
That's a given.
And so that peeved them quite a bit, and none of the other starters.
Charizard sells a lot of content. That's why. Charizard is probably Pokemon's second mascot behind Pikachu. Mm-hmm.
So
and of course, Pikachu made it in as well.
It makes sense, but it's still a bit worrying. Because even the champion's ace Pokemon in this game is a Charizard.
Well,
and they gave it a Gigantamax form. Oh yeah, I should also talk about Dynamaxing in a while.
Yeah. Well, so the inherent issue with stripping the game of some Pokemon in favor of others is that it sets a precedent that Nintendo doesn't think your Pokemon is a good Pokemon.
Yeah.
Like they distinctly picked this other Pokemon over yours. Get good, scrub. Like, deal with it. You know what I mean?
So, what is also a bit interesting is that a lot of the really good and competitive Pokemon they took out have taken out. And part of the reason is because they wanted to go for a British theme because the new region's based on Britain. But some of that doesn't make sense. Like, there's a Pokemon called Lillipup, and it has 2 evolutions, which is literally based on a Yorkshire Terrier, and it's not in there. Like, it would be perfect for the Galar region.
Yeah, if it's a British region, why? Okay.
So there are some pretty questionable things. There are some Pokemon that suit it very well, but yeah. So, and I do like how, but then that's been in every regional dex in the past games, because all they've done, because every Pokemon game from Generation 3 onwards has had a regional dex that doesn't have all the Pokemon, but then you just unlock the national Pokedex after you complete it, where you can get every single Pokemon. What Sword and Shield really did was just cut off the national Pokedex. So in that sense...
Well, that's what Dexit is. It's no national Pokedex.
Yeah. So with the... So it's still got a very large regional dex, which is 400 species.
Yeah.
And so if you're a casual player, you probably won't get affected at all by Dexit. It's just with all the fans. With the hardcore fans.
I actually disagree. I think as a casual player, it's not that you'll be hugely affected, you'll be less affected, but I still think casual players will be affected. Because... if anything, casual players are the ones that are more prone to pick Pokemon that they like over Pokemon that are good. Like, to reference the one in Great Jim Sterling, no fucking Ekans! Like, you know,
yeah.
Ekans isn't a good Pokemon, but Jim fucking loves Ekans, and it's not in there. And Jim's a fan of Pokemon. But I would say he plays casually, at least from how we understand it. He doesn't he doesn't really talk.
He doesn't look like a hardcore.
He doesn't talk.
There is though the new coming fans who don't know about Pokemon at all. Like,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not going to affect them. It's not going to affect them. Like Jim Sterling doesn't.
There are many different types of fans. So Jim Sterling, who's a casual fan who knew old Pokemon, he would get disappointed.
I'm disappointed. Well, actually, you know what? I don't know if my Pokemon that I like were cut or not.
So
but,
you like Skitty and Pachirisu, correct?
Wrong and wrong? Oh, Pachirisu, yes. I don't know where you got Skitty
I thought you
from.
liked Skitty.
I don't know.
It's the one that's a little cat.
Yeah, it's gross looking. It's got like Chinese eyes and it's got a hand for a tail. Gross. Get that gay shit out of here.
I'll tell you now that Pachirisu's cut, I'm pretty sure.
Pachirisu would...
I don't know the entire Pokedex by memory, but
of course fucking Pachirisu's cut. Because he's
generally, a lot of the cuts have been Pokemon that share the same type and purpose as another Pokemon.
Yeah, so we've got Pikachu, so why have another small rodent that does electricity, right?
Yeah. So, and also because you know how because Pachirisu is Generation 4's quote-unquote Pikachu clone.
Mm-hmm.
I think they got rid of every Pikachu clone aside from the new one they brought in this generation, which is called Morpeko.
Right.
And they kept Togedemaru from Generation 7 because it's part Steel type, so it brings something different.
Yeah, I bet... Oh, goodness, that's a lot of wind. I bet they didn't... I bet they got rid of Baneri, I bet they got rid of Ninetales, I bet they got rid of...
They didn't get rid of Ninetales.
Okay, I'll give them that. There's my main, if I ever play Sword and Shield.
Most likely, if you have a set of favourite Pokemon, some of them will not be there, like with mine.
Yeah.
And some of them will. But, you know, the fact that they're not all possibly there will be a problem. If you're a fan who likes certain types of Pokemon.
There's no Lickitung. That's not one that I like, but that's another one that Jim Sterling likes.
Yeah. So
No
you're
licky
probably like,
licky.
chances are probably one of your favorite Pokemon is going to go. And again, it might have been
No Torchic, Blaziken.
No.
Nope, that's gone.
Blaziken's one of my. Yeah, they got rid of all the starters from previous gens except Charizard.
Wait, every single starter from every single generation except for Charizard is gone.
Yeah.
Fucking hell! What the? Well, and Pikachu. Isn't Pikachu like a special starter for Yellow?
Well, it was a starter in Yellow, but
Yeah.
it's not a proper starter.
No, I know it's not one of the.
It's a starter because it's a mascot.
Yeah, it's not one of the literals. Like, yeah, no.
It's not like a grass, fire, or water type that has.
I feel like that's old. I
counterparts.
feel like that's archaic. It's done.
Well, I think they could. Well, again, if we're going to talk about the formula, they could. They don't even have to do much, but they could just make the trio of starters different types. Like, you can make it one a psychic type, one a dark type, and one a fighting type. You could even just do that. At least it would be fresh.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the point of the starters being a triangle of strengths and weaknesses is to give the companions that travel the world not with you, but parallel
the
to
rivals and stuff.
Yeah, the companions that travel the world parallel to you a bit more meaning. Like the companion that you really got to worry about is the one that has the one that you're weak to, and the companion that you kind of like actually because it's more than likely the character that's the opposite gender of you and is supposed to be a weird love interest is the one that you're strong to, but I understand, but then is there no other group of 3 attributes that have that same triangular relationship? Like,
there is psychic, fighting, and dark that almost has a triangular relationship.
Almost.
However, dark is immune to psychic, not resistant against it. So psychic types have a big problem, but you can counteract that with secondary types in the evolutions. So you can give them differently typed moves, which most Pokemon have anyway, and give them a secondary type that might be strong against the dark type or something. Like you could do it many different ways. So they could also, like, for instance, there was, and I'll also probably bring up a lot of Pokemon Colosseum that you probably don't know much about.
I don't know much about any of the Pokemon games, just a reminder.
Well, true, yeah. There was a side game called Pokemon Colosseum on the GameCube that it had the mainline Pokemon mechanics, like it had the full battle system and everything, and it had full 3D graphics and all that, released in the early to mid 2000s, and it had a very different story that was not formulaic to the main series at all, and it was probably the only time Pokemon made anything that wasn't formulaic.
Well, I mean, apart from the first ever Mystery Dungeon, until Mystery Dungeon became the new formulaic.
Yeah, of course. But they're more spin-offs, not side games, because Pokemon Colosseum as a side game shared the exact same mechanical base in the battle system as the Generation 3 games at the time. Mystery Dungeon it's based on Pokemon main series mechanics, but it actually has a very different way of damage calculation and stat calculation, and stuff like that. And there's, of course, the whole grid-based movement.
Fair enough.
So they're more spin-offs, and so Pokemon spin-offs don't count, because they're not even, Game Freak probably don't even know about them.
You really think?
Well, to be fair, Colosseum wasn't developed by Game Freak either. Game Freak, Genius Sonority, who did make Colosseum, used Game Freak's battle system, and then moved it over to the GameCube.
Fair enough.
So it had a very different story. Like, for instance, instead of starting in a house where your mother farewells you when you get a starter, you start as a person with two Pokemon already, an Espeon and an Umbreon, and you're breaking into an evil team's base, and you're stealing Pokeballs. Like, isn't that something different?
That's very interesting. Yes.
So
I know I don't sound interesting, but it is very interesting.
I mean, yeah, it's different to what they
comparatively,
usually do.
yeah.
Now, but yeah, so there is a lot of potential for difference, but there is so, but yeah, this goes into Sword and Shield's story because Pokemon has a problem where because its stories have never been world class, right?
That's one way to put it.
But there have been some generations better than others in story. The within its own context, of course, not counting every other RPG game.
Oh yeah.
And so the
I dare you to put any Pokemon story up against like even the most generic Final Fantasy game.
And so because Pokemon usually has a very short script, and Game Freak have always been a bit etchy at storytelling. They've always it's been very weird. Sometimes they've done it very well, and sometimes you can tell they had an idea, but they just didn't execute it. So the two generations that have the best stories are generally agreed to be generations 5 and 7, but they introduced other problems in that they were both very linear games because they had so much story events going on. Like they go, oh, you go to the next city, you have to do this thing for the story, and the player would just go, oh, I want to catch Pokemon. So both those generations very divisive because of that. And so Pokemon games then either fall into the category of it's mostly just the mechanics with a small pathetic story mixed in there, or it's got a bit more of an involved story, but it sacrifices some of the freedom. And so Sun and Moon especially are very infamous for it.
For which one?
Sun and Moon were the Gen 7 games before Sword and Shield.
No, but which you just said two different. Like they're either no story or story enough that it sacrifices. Which one is Sun and Moon?
Story enough that it sacrifices.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
So Sun and Moon actually has some rather well-developed characters, but yeah, it as a result, as you walk down a route, you get held up because there's a cutscene, and then about 10 steps down the road, there's another cutscene, and it's also full of tutorials because they just wanted to make it easy, and that goes down to with Sword and Shield story. Sword and Shield is another iteration of a very bad story that you can almost ignore.
Right.
So I was interested in the way Sword and Shield would bring out its story, though, and this then goes to our discussion of the story relating to player progression.
Right, because believe it or not, this is not a discussion about your opinion with Pokemon Sword and Shield. This is actually a discussion about story progression and how it ties to the gameplay, or something like that. Something vaguely similar.
I guess it's kind of both of those things.
Yeah.
So, because if we're just on the story progression subject, we actually haven't talked much about that so far. But anyway, so I was interested, when they were revealing Sword and Shield and revealed some of the characters, I was hoping that they would make the story a progression thing that naturally progresses just based on the Pokemon, the Pokemon formula where you get badges, because it's all based around the Galar Pokemon League, and the gyms in these games, instead of just being buildings where you battle the gym leader, they're based in stadiums, and so the Galar region has this culture around Pokemon battling. And you, if you're a strong trainer, you become famous, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that concept then is inherently linked to the way Pokemon progresses itself. And so I was hoping those things would work together in that it wouldn't actually be a very, very long scripted story, but it would at least just make a lot of sense without Game Freak just trying to shoehorn in this weird idea into the Pokemon plot, which is generally what they tried to do in most previous generations. But the sad part was they did kind of shoehorn a completely unrelated concept into the league, and so they didn't flesh out the league arc very well, and then as a result, that sacrificed them um, from really ushering out the well, it sacrificed them from really bringing out the other concept they wanted to introduce. So, well, because do you want? I'll spoil a little bit for you.
You can spoil as much as you want, Patrick. I have
yeah, because you're not going to play it. So, the main so I was hoping it'd mostly be around the league, but instead, another very equal theme is actually surrounding the backstory of the legendaries. And so it's a really typical RPG story where you got like thousands of years ago there was an event called the Darkest Day, and they also link it to Dynamaxing, which is the main gimmick of Sword and Shield. Mm-hmm. And so there was the Darkest Day, and there was a hero who saved them. And
you can't say that without a stupid voice, can you? Like,
not really.
Try and say there was Darkest Day. I can't do it either without a stupid voice.
One day, thousands of years ago, there was an event called the Darkest Day. It was when everything was peaceful until the Fire Nation attacked.
Yeah. And
only one hero could stop them.
And in order to do that, they needed to get the 4 elemental crystals. Alright, I'm done.
And guess what? The hero had a sword and a shield.
Did he actually?
Well, it turned out that the heroes were the legendaries, which, as you know, are just a dog with a sword and a dog with a shield.
Yep.
So
hey, I've played Dark Souls, man.
Based a lot around that.
I've played Dark Souls, man. I've played Dark Souls, man. You can hit people with shields. That shit hurts.
But the so they based it around that, and it turned out because where the whole league thing then fit into it was that they had this chairman who was a businessman running the league. Mm-hmm. And so it turned out that he wanted to recreate the Darkest Day for some reason. It's not even that well explained as to why he wanted to do it. He just decided to do it.
Ah, of course.
And so
casually bring about the apocalypse of the world.
Well, there was a slight explanation because he said that it would happen, like if you left it for 100 years without activating it, it would happen anyway, so why not do it now? But there's no insight into his motivations as to why he's doing it. Like, you just see him at times through the game being a typical league chairman, and then he just goes, "Oh, okay, I think
suddenly
we should
I'm the bad
guy."
Day. Suddenly,
and then you have the main 2 legendaries help you stop it, and the 3rd legendary, because you know how there's always a 3rd legendary with a set of 2. So the 3rd legendary called Eternatus is the guy that he uses. So that is a very small twist to the plot. In Sword and Shield, you actually catch Eternatus first, and then you catch the box legendary in the post game. But that's just about the main twist they do to the Pokemon story, Pokemon formula. So you stop the chairman, and then he just gets arrested, and like you don't see any societal consequences about it. So it shoehorns the 2 concepts together, and they're not. As a result, neither of them are that well built. Yeah. I was hoping that they would at least do a more natural story where it's more about, like, they could even still have the chairman as the villain, but he just does generally corrupt things or something. And then you find out there are problems with the league structure or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, at least it would make more sense. And then it would more involve you. Oh yeah, you're climbing up the gyms. You're becoming a celebrity. And it could even question the morality of being a famous Pokemon trainer, because then, what, are you just getting involved in the corrupt ways that the chairman's doing and stuff like that? Like, wouldn't that be better anyway than the whole Darkest Day plot?
Yeah, it sounds pretty. I think I'll stop that sentence where it is.
But anyway, there was also another thing they also advertised before the game came out quite prolifically was that there'd be a
Alright.
lot of rivals and their motivations competing against you to become the champion. But again, it wasn't built on as much as I thought it would. So another small twist in this game's story is that the villainous team, Team Yell, they're not like most other villainous teams. They're the ones who are trying to awaken a legendary to destroy the world or something.
Mm-hmm.
They're just a fan club of one of your rivals, and they just want to stop the rivals from being championed first. They like block your road and everything, but they're not actually that much involved. And it turned out that the reason why they were a fan club was because they wanted to, there's this one hometown in the Galar region called Spikemuth that's like dilapidated, and so they thought that if she was champion, it would make their town
Clean.
their town more famous and then get more prosperous. But I thought that there'd be something more. I thought there'd be something more to it. But literally with Team Yell, you just run into them a few times in the story, just a couple of grunts, and then after you have 6 badges, and I'm like thinking, hey, isn't the plot meant to pick up by now? You then just run into Spikemuth, and it turns out that rival and the Team Yell are related to the 7th gym leader as well. But like all that happens, you just run into Spikemuth and they go, oh yeah, it turns out we're actually from Spikemuth, and we're trying to make it look better. Hey, we're the gym trainers, you beat us, and then that's just the end of the Team Yell arc. They're actually like, I was hoping they'd be a bit more involved. Like, probably my favorite evil team in Pokemon was Team Skull from Sun and Moon, because you could tell that they were a result. They were a side effect of the Alola region's culture. I think you could benefit a lot from cultural storytelling in Pokemon and the way the region culturally works. But I hope Team Yell would be like that too, but they weren't. They weren't as much anyway. So they were just there.
Yeah. No, I don't know too much about the story, so I obviously don't have too much to comment on. But
yeah. Anyway, I think that's all I need to say really. So I'll go on to, but also outside of the wild area, they've obviously got the normal routes, and even compared to routes in previous games, they're rather flat and not interesting.
why am I unsurprised by this?
There aren't that many dungeons actually. There's how in Pokemon, like in the old games, there were like a lot of caves that they weren't even compulsory. You could just optionally explore them, and you could get rare items or rare Pokemon you can't find anywhere else. There wasn't really that in Sword and Shield, and I was hoping that in the wild area, and they could do that in the future or something, but I was hoping that in the wild area they could have like dungeon entrances there, and you could optionally just explore them if you want, and it would make the wild area so much grander. But no, that's not there. So the wild area is just an open mass with a lot of wild Pokemon in it, berry trees, and the Gigantamax dens.
Yeah.
So, I'll talk to you about Dynamaxing. So, you know how they had Mega Evolution a few years back?
Vaguely.
Yeah, they had Mega Evolution, so, a more badass form of some Pokemon. And then in Generation 7, their gimmick was Z moves, so it's like, hey, it's a super powerful move that a Pokemon can make. And then in Gen 8, this thing is Dynamaxing, which is
literally literally making it fucking really big.
Yeah, literally. And also when a Pokemon is Dynamaxed, their moves turn into super-powered versions of those moves. So, for example, every offensive Water-type move then becomes is it Max Geyser or something, which is just a really powerful water type move. And the other thing with Dynamax is that you only last for it only lasts for 3 turns, so there is a bit more timing to it, but it does get old eventually. The other thing too is that you can only use it in gym battles and other important battles, where there are Dynamax power spots.
Right.
And so Dynamax also relates to the story, because what the chairman then does is that by making the darkest day, he makes these Pokemon grow huge, and then they run around and destroy things. But it was just another kind of attacked on thing. And so Dynamaxing, in fact, I've been seeing on Smogon forums that a lot of competitive Pokemon players, they think that Dynamax will just not be used in competitive battles.
I think that makes sense. Sense.
Because all it really does is buff your Pokemon's attacking and defending stats, I think, and gives access to those superpowered moves. So it is rather interesting to deal with in gym battles, and that's another thing. The way Sword and Shield do difficulty is, it is actually a bit harder, I think, than some of the previous games, because with X and Y, like, you know of the infamous experience share, right?
No.
Well, in X and Y onwards, you had the experience share, which gives every Pokemon experience points rather than just the one you battled with.
Right.
So that was partly what made X and Y really easy, but another part of it was that the Pokemon's movesets and EVs and IVs were really bad. So they deliberately made it easy for them to beat. So in Sword and Shield, I could tell they scaled that up. They often gave Pokemon moves that were designed to hit their weaknesses.
Right.
So you couldn't just, send a water type against a grass type. Like they might, the grass type might actually know a fire type against a grass type. Like the grass type might know a rock type move or something that could destroy the fire types. There was more of that. However, it was kind of counteracted by that it was more easy, and I suppose it makes more of a scalable thing depending on how you play it, because in this game they introduced a lot of candies which give a lot of experience points.
Right.
And you get those from doing a lot of Dynamax raid battles, which are in the wild area. So if you do enough Dynamax raid battles, you could just get heaps of EXP candies, and over-level your Pokemon that way. And so if you actually try and build a strong team, which is what I did, I eventually got extremely overpowered.
Yeah.
And so I was about 8 levels higher than the champion's Pokemon by the end of the game.
Yeah.
And my Pokemon, and I deliberately tried to give my Pokemon good move sets because,
well, why wouldn't
because
you?
I like doing that.
Why wouldn't you even?
Yeah. So after I made my team very good, they trashed everything. But at least the trainer's Pokemon are a bit better than that of X, Y, and Sun, Moon, but it's still not very high. And the problem too is the AI. The AI is still does the same tactics as it did generations ago. So I was just able to predict when this trainer would use a full restore, and just move accordingly. That's another thing that I think will really help. If you make the AI really advanced and make them do unpredictable things, like switch Pokemon when they know that there's a different Pokemon that could better attack yours, and it could, because the way human versus human competitive battles work, there's actually a lot of mind games going on, and so I'd like to see that in the main series. Mm.
I feel like
Um,
Pokemon could do a lot to be better, but I feel like Pokemon could have been doing a lot to be better for a very long time. I've
yeah, like,
always preferred Final Fantasy. Oops. I've always preferred Final Fantasy to Pokemon for a very, very good reason, in my opinion.
yeah. So the so that's the thing. Like, I think that Pokemon's very slow advancements, um, they've been excused for a long time, either because of hardware limitations or that it just or because it hasn't been as much time since the beginning. So they're like, oh, okay. But I think finally by now, some of the hardcore fans are realizing that it's getting very stale.
Mm.
But then that goes on to the next point I'd make, because despite all this controversy, Sword and Shield in the first week, I think, sold 6 million copies and have already broken Nintendo Switch sales records. Um, and so, um, the entire time, all of this controversy was from all the very hardcore fans that actually only made a small portion of the Pokemon fan base. All the casual ones were at least happy enough to buy the game, um, despite Dexit. So it then creates, I think, this interesting situation. And I think the other thing, if you look at Sword and Shield, um, is that it's not really like what it's doing isn't that new. It's like it's not just a sudden thing that no, they're really bad because they cut Dexit. I think it's just a culmination of what's been happening over the past few
It's
generations.
no, it's
Where
the
there's
Bethesda.
been
It's the Bethesda effect. We've all been able to.
yeah,
We've all
yeah,
been able to write Bethesda's many failings off because at the very least they build a competent game with a world full of things to do. And when they fail on one of their main premises, it just brings to light all the other little fucking bullshit things that come across. Because other games can make massive open world games and not have 60 billion bugs that fucking you have to deal with within the first 10 minutes of the game. It's the Bethesda effect, you know.
yeah,
Now that something major has impacted the game, it's opened up the floodgates for all the people to complain about
yeah.
everything.
So that's literally it. Like the the two major prongs, one Dexit, and then also Sword and Shield's upscaling of the engine to the Switch. It just furtherly revealed the problem that Pokemon has had for a long time, and so that sent some fans crazy, and regrettably, but I guess that's what always happens on the internet. Like the the controversy at the beginning was well founded, but then it all turned crazy and toxic, and so it sort of alienated the argument for change in Pokemon, um, in a way.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I think then it kind of creates. So as you were saying with the Bethesda effect, Bethesda just get forgiven for their problems in their games because they're Bethesda. So Pokemon, I think it's a thing that I have coined up called Pokemon exceptionalism, where it's sort of then the way it's treated then turns it into its own thing that isn't affected by outside context. Like so you can't despite the fact that in many ways it's outdated compared to other modern RPGs. Um, uh, people just you just people just give it a free pass anyway, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So and you can but I think too, like one of my other favorite RPGs, Persona 5, like on a technical level, it doesn't overhaul the Persona series stables, but it was just able to greatly expand upon them.
Yeah, of course.
So that marks a
Persona
different,
5 compared to Persona 4 is absolutely revolutionary.
yeah. It still uses Persona 4's general base, but it just expands the breadth a lot more, and the way it told its story was more involved.
Yeah.
whereas Sword and Shield didn't do that over Sun and Moon. And that brings up another point where it comes to development, the Pokemon development cycle. So this is where I go back to Fire Emblem Three Houses, because because that's another thing, because Fire Emblem have, like, they come out with a lot of games very often, don't they? Like, they have like 4 or 5 games on the 3DS or something.
I'm pretty sure one of them is another Warriors style, a Dynasty Warriors style game, to be fair.
But anyway, Fire Emblem games do get released fairly often. So the developers of Fire Emblem, and I can't remember who developed Fire Emblem.
Look it up. You're sitting at a computer.
Yeah, that's true. The developer is Intelligent Systems, which is closely affiliated with Nintendo. Anyway, so they made their last Fire Emblem game for the 3DS, and they were like, oh, okay, so we're going to this new console. If you're moving on to a new console, we should probably approach this from a broader perspective, given the heightened hardware limitations. So they ultimately decided to partner with Koei Tecmo so they could have more developers to create this new entry to the game that would expand upon the previous concepts. And they did that very well. Whereas Game Freak didn't think that when they thought of a new Pokemon for the Switch. They're like, yeah, let's just make another Pokemon, and we'll upgrade the engine so that it can be supported on the Switch. And they're less development costs, kind of thing. And I think that relates a bit to the whole Pokemon yearly or bi-yearly release cycle, because almost since the beginning, pretty much, they had to release a new game every 1 or 2 years, whether it be a remake or a third version. But they had to do it every 1 or 2 years, a new entry. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is a big thing that inhibits them from really wanting to innovate with their games. And additionally, I think, like, the staff, well, it's actually confirmed that, because Game Freak actually do make some other very little known games, and they do that just because the staff understandably get very tired from making Pokemon games over and over again.
Yeah, that can't be fun, living your life only making Pokemon.
So Game Freak have this program where they sometimes just make an entirely new game using some of the developers in the studio, just so that they can work on something new and refresh their minds. So working on a Pokemon game every year would be very tiring, and I think then that leads to the lack of innovation. And that's the thing with Sword and Shield, or with the first Pokemon game on the Switch, they could have innovated on anything, and they didn't even have to turn the formula up on its head. But they could have just done something like did a Breath of the Wild, and not just have the towns connected with routes, but with open areas or something. Like basically an expansion of the wild area. They could have done that. Like, they just had to think about it, like with what other developers do.
I don't think that's there. I think that you're missing a key point of this puzzle, and I think the key point of this puzzle that you're missing is publishers. I think the reason why game companies, especially ones with well-known series, don't take risks is because publishers are like, invested. Publishers are invested in the company, and they are invested financially, specifically, and maybe Game Freak want to do something very interesting with Pokemon, but the publishers who
Nintendo
are behind,
let's have a new game by November 2019. Make it happen.
That's exactly the same as the previous ones, because that's all that's ever worked. Well, maybe we want to do something new. That would be a terrible idea. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's another thing too. You're totally right. And so you got well, actually, the relationship between Game Freak and Nintendo is very complicated, because they both own parts of Pokemon along with Creatures Inc. So it'd be very hard to explain who controls what. But yes, your argument is certainly valid. Where I think they're afraid to change because they don't know how fans will receive it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, well, the thing with Pokemon, it became successful because its core idea and the way they implemented it struck a chord in the first instance. They didn't have to try and find it. And so once they found it, they thought, well, the best way to survive is to keep making the same thing, except slightly broadening it.
Yep.
Oh and I
God.
think that's the
thing.
thing.
There's been loads of cops going past.
Hmm.
I don't know if you can hear them through my mic.
Oh, I can hear them very slightly, yeah.
Yeah.
Gee, there must be something going on.
It's Ipswich. What are you surprised about?
That's true. Anyway,
Rip.
So, with I think the reason why things like Breath of the Wild exist is because while Zelda's a very big franchise, it's still only a fraction the size of Pokemon, and so you won't have fans buying everything that comes out. And the fan base are very divided over things like, say, Skyward Sword, for instance. So they know that they can't just make things like Skyward Sword and sell. So they have to really think on how to make a game that would break the boundaries so that people would be impressed by it.
Or whether they should at all.
Yeah. So I think they made Breath of the Wild so that because they thought it would be their best gamble. It was wise to gamble and make a really kick-ass game. Even again with Mario, even though Mario's it's almost as big as Pokemon, at least Mario's slightly bigger than Pokemon in game sales, but as a franchise as a whole, because Pokemon has everything else surrounding it, like the anime and everything. So overall, it's a much bigger franchise than Mario.
Yeah.
But even as big as Mario is, they still felt they had to adapt if they wanted to stay relevant. Pokemon doesn't, from a financial point of view, Pokemon doesn't need to do that because they know that they can make something that just gets a pass, doesn't have to doesn't have to be the game of the year, and it can still sell 6 million copies in a week, just like with Sword and Shield. And I think part of the thing is, because I guess it would be a bit hard for you to understand, but because people who do find a lot of fun out of standard Pokemon concept, like the whole catching Pokemon, beating gyms kind of thing, because there are heaps of people that really like that, and in that way, Sword and Shield does that. It just doesn't do it in a different way. But there are a lot of more casual fans who are just happy with keeping on doing that. And while they could benefit from a much grander game,
did you hear it that time?
They just don't quite. Sorry.
Did you hear it that time? It was much louder.
Oh right. I didn't hear it that time. To be fair, I was talking.
Yeah. Anyway, keep on going. Even though they could benefit from having...
Even though they could benefit from a grander game, they're still okay with something that just has the same formula in a different setting. And that's the thing. Like, the Pokemon fan base, unlike many other fan bases, has a very casual element to it. And it's been accelerated further, especially since the release of Pokemon Go and then Pokemon Let's Go to which was basically created to introduce Go fans to the main series.
Yeah.
So I'm not demonizing casual fans at all, but they did. But they are like the fact that they will buy. The fact that they will buy a game, even if it doesn't really build that much on the previous ones.
It also gives the developers and the publishers the wrong idea.
Yeah, well, it makes them, because ultimately everything is for money, so it just gives them the idea, well, if we don't need to innovate to make just as much money, why bother?
Well,
if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, there's a good Jim Sterling, I don't know if it's one video, he's always mentioned every now and then whenever he brings up publishers and videos that the publishers don't need to listen to the feedback of how well the game went. They should, actually, is what I should say, but they don't need to, because once they have their sales, they've gotten what they want out of it, and that's often
like
why
the shareholders only care about how much money they get.
It's
they don't actually give
that's often why
they
you
don't
get
actually
games.
give a crap about the game.
It's often why you get games that have, you know, like ridiculously high production cost and like ridiculously low reviews.
So from a business perspective, taking a risk is generally bad unless you need to take a risk. And
which
so
I have to say financially makes sense. Like, why would you willingly take a risk, right? Like,
from a financial point of view, Pokemon is excellent because you can pump out anything, guarantee sales upon sales. The other thing about Game Freak, like Game Freak isn't actually that big of a studio, surprisingly.
Yeah, we've chatted about this. It's actually much smaller than, you know.
Like, you know, it's not like one of the studios of EA or something, which explains why. Because like some of like, well, despite the fact that EA has heaps of problems with its like loot boxes and stuff, its games have cutting edge graphics, and
most of the time,
like Pokemon can't hold a candle to. And that's just because Game Freak's actually very small. They like, and it wouldn't make sense from the outset because Pokemon is such a huge money spinner. But again, they don't need to because they're just going to make as much money with less developers. So it's better financially to make a not quite as good game. So because of Pokemon's financial security, it's actually kind of holding it back from innovating as much as it could.
So what are you suggesting? We boycott Pokemon and don't buy any of the games?
Well,
put them in financial jeopardy.
Well, a lot of people have already boycotted
Sword and Shield.
But these are just the hardcore fans. They might like to make. I mean, again, despite the fact that the boycotts took place, Sword and Shield sold 6 million copies. So, I mean, technically it's a solution, but it's never going to happen.
Yeah, right.
As like until Game Freak stuff up so badly that even the casual fans don't like it. Then
until Pokemon does a Fallout 76.
Yeah, unless Pokemon does a Fallout 76.
Oh my god! Stop doing illegal things.
I can hear that one.
Stop doing illegal things. I'm trying to record a YouTube video.
How many police cars have gone past?
It's Ipswich. Fuck knows, but it doesn't stop.
Anyway, so what was I talking about? I have a mental blank.
Unless Pokemon does a Fallout 76, fans are always going to
Fallout 76. Even if its games are still rather
vaguely repetitive and mediocre.
Yeah,
people are always going to buy Pokemon. Like,
as long as they're decently good, like I think Sword and Shield as games generally are still pretty good games. They're just not noteworthy or great or substantial. Like, and they're probably not worth the price tag that that they're selling at. I think they're selling like, you know, as much as Breath of the Wild is.
Gotta catch some of them, Pokemon.
It's like, you know, you'll still get, if you enjoy the Pokemon concept, they're still going to deliver in that front. They're just literally Pokemon for the Switch. They're Pokemon on a Switch even. They don't expand the concept further. So I think the fact that Sword and Shield sold that much despite the controversy has legitimized this current direction. And so it will only go further into that direction.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting for someone like me who is more of a hardcore fan that would really love a Pokemon game that goes above and beyond. At least, though, I have other game franchises I can really look forward to, like Persona, where with the lucky thing with Persona is that because it doesn't have the 1 or 2 year production cycle, they can put heaps of effort into their games.
Persona 5, Persona 5 Royal, baby.
Persona 5 Royal's an interesting one too, because in a way, I guess it's like the way Pokemon does its third versions.
Yeah,
but,
it is.
And so you can tell it's a cash grab.
It's vaguely relatable to those, though it has a lot more.
So you can tell Royal is a cash grab, but it will still add a lot to the game, and so parts of it will be questionable, but at least...
I don't think it's a cash grab. I don't know if it's a cash grab. I don't know if I would call it that. I mean, so all the previous versions, the additional version has also been to update it to a new console.
Persona 3 Fez and Persona 4 Golden.
Yeah, they've been to update it to a new console as well.
Whereas Fez was on the PS2, but Golden was on the PS Vita.
I thought Fez was also on the PSP.
No, there was a different Persona 3 port called Persona 3 Portable, but it wasn't Fez.
Radio. But anyway, I don't feel like it's a cash grab, even if it's a really well invested and highly detailed cash grab. I don't feel like I could call it that.
But anyway, despite our opinions, Royal still did take 3 years to make, so and so it'll have
it's not done
a
yet.
lot of new content in it.
Royal isn't done yet, is it?
It's out in Japan.
Wait, really? How have I not been seeing any YouTube con? Never mind, Atlas's.
Yeah, Atlas. That's the bad part about Atlas. They really don't like YouTube footage. So.
When does it happen in Australia?
It's been out in Japan. It's coming out early next year because localization. That's another thing about Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield don't have any voice acting. And
yeah, Final Fantasy made that jump when it first hit the PS2. It's been how long has the PS2 been out for now?
It came out in 2000.
It's been
Final Fantasy X came out in 2001.
It's been 19 years, Nintendo.
So
Come on.
When Pokemon was still on 8-bit Game Boy Colors.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy was voice acted. So Pokemon Sword and Shield aren't voice acted, and let me tell you something. There's a mobile game that's like a spin-off called Pokemon Masters that does have voice acting. So you'd think that, like, why doesn't the main series have that? It is the larger, more heavily invested games, right? I can see one issue from the voice acting, and that is because Pokemon is so huge, it has to get released in multiple languages, which requires a lot of localization, which means we'd have to go back to 6 months waiting times for other countries outside of Japan.
That's a baby excuse. Games already have to deal with that, and it's not a big issue. Also, Kingdom Hearts had a worldwide release, and it was localized in lots of different languages, so...
Oh, well, there we go.
Baby excuse. Do not accept.
So if Kingdom Hearts was released worldwide, then that does make it less excusable. So you've got so Pokemon would do great if it's voice acted. Like Sword and Shield's cutscenes on the Switch. I mean, it makes sense not having voice acting on even as far as the DS, but when you got characters with their mouths moving and no sound coming out in a Switch game, it's pretty awkward.
Yeah.
And the thing is, Pokemon
actually, I should check.
They already have a lot of voice actors in different languages, so they can just use similar voice actors or even the same voice actors to voice the characters in the game.
Yes, it was. I just had to check if Kingdom Hearts 3 was released worldwide, and it was. Yeah. I'd feel bad if I was like, it was released worldwide, and then I was fucking wrong.
So they could, they've already got the infrastructure they can do to voice a game.
Yeah.
So they can.
Isn't one of the complaints that the voices would be different between the versions? Like
You
between
mean, like, the different languages?
no, between the game and the anime.
Oh, right, yeah. I mean,
think-
I don't know, but even if they use different actors,
I think it's a baby
they've still
excuse.
got, like, they know how to record voices because they've been doing it on a show for 22 years.
I think that's a baby excuse anyway.
So, yeah, like, they could easily put that in. And if they were able to put it in Pokemon Masters, like, Pokemon
Oop, hold on.
was released in multiple
Pat,
languages.
hold on. You roboted out a bit.
Okay.
Uh,
Should I?
Go again.
So, I'm sure Pokemon Masters was released in multiple languages, and they voiced that. So, why not the main games? And they could they could do a lot better storytelling. Part of Persona 5's great storytelling is because of its voices.
Yeah.
So they could, like, they have enough money to do it. If Atlas can do it, Nintendo can do it.
It's pretty
So
silly.
there's definitely a lot of that. So I think those things that they could have done, they probably could have done if they wanted to. I just think they just didn't have the drive for it. So Pokemon doesn't have this drive for greatness anymore. Unlike the first few gens, at least, where because they just know that if they're going to make the same amount of money, it again branches back to the shareholder argument.
Yep.
Also, I'll give you an interesting fact you may or may not know. Did you know that Toby Fox composed a track?
Yes, I
for
know that
Swords?
Toby Fox. That's
Did you know that it's also the best music track in the game?
Why am I unsurprised by this?
So, again, Sword and Shield, I think musically are actually the weakest of the franchise. Because I think, like, the music in most Pokemon games is actually very good, in my opinion. But Sword and Shield, generally, the music doesn't stand out. It just has... It reminds me a bit of Final Fantasy XII, but in a different way. Like in how 12 is just orchestral noise in the background.
Yep.
An actual composition.
Mm-hmm.
Sword and Shield reminds me of that. Like, I can't remember most of the themes of the game. There is the first route theme is really good. There is a cave theme that is really good, and while the gym battle theme I don't think is an excellent composition, it does fit the idea that you're in a stadium and you've got a cheering crowd. So, but that's all I can really remember from the soundtrack. And
that
other
and
than,
Toby
there's of
Fox's.
course Toby Fox's one. So, I honestly don't get.
Yeah, but to be fair, we know Toby Fox is fucking amazeballs at music. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So,
So is
So
this
I don't
conversation?
know why Pokemon kind of dropped the ball on the soundtrack, and this is a controversial fact because some of the fans love Sword and Shield's soundtrack, but I personally found it the weakest, other than Toby Fox's thing. I found it altogether the weakest in the series.
Is this conversation about the way story the thing that we were saying it was going to be about, like?
Oh yeah, the story relations.
Yeah.
So,
because I feel like we've pretty heavily drifted off that.
yeah, maybe we could make a second thing that talks more about that and that doesn't, it'll talk about how other games do it.
Well, I'm still unsure of what you even mean by it, I'm going to be completely honest. Like, when you told me the theme, I was like, I don't, what, you're going to have to give me an example so that I can relate this to other
Okay,
games.
so I do have an example, actually.
Okay.
So, I'll give you a story that relates the story to the gameplay. It's not even it's not a complicated story, but it just works. So, in Need for Speed Most Wanted, which I think you've played a bit.
Yes, I borrowed off of you.
The main plot, yeah, you basically, there's this guy called Ray. You got this hot
Oh my
BMW
fucking
car, this guy called Razor beats you in a race. He takes your car, and in order to progress up to in order to get your car back and get your honor back, you need to beat the Blacklist 15. And so it kind of ties the way the game progresses to the story. Your goal is a part of the story. So there are some games that technically it's not part of the game progression. The story is just something else that's just there. But there are some other games that actually have the concept of the plot tied in with the way the game progresses. So, do you understand that?
Not really. It doesn't sound like a specific thing that games do or don't do. Like,
well, I think it does
I don't know if that is a good example of that. Like, that just seems like a regular in-game reward for doing a part of the story. Like,
yeah,
that seems
anyway.
That seems pretty bog standard to me.
Well, okay. Well, we'll talk about that later. Anyway, and we could even debate about whether it's true or not, because that would be interesting.
I'm not. It's more that I just literally don't understand.
Yeah, right. So, well, I'll give you another example. So,
hold on.
A lot of other RPG games, they have a plot, but it's not. It's sort of not as connected to the game progression, and there are advantages and disadvantages of both types. Like, so for instance, Final Fantasy IX, its plot is like it makes you do things in the story, but it's not done in the same way as Need for Speed Most Wanted. It's not like becoming the champion of racing or something. It's just you use the battle and exploration mechanics to do this very long story. I probably didn't explain it.
No, you've explained that terribly, because I don't understand the significance of your point at all. So far, you've said exactly the same thing about the two games, that you play the game in order to advance the story, and that the story gives you the reason to play the game. That doesn't make any special sense why you're saying Need for Speed does a thing and Final Fantasy IX doesn't.
Anyway, well, I'll have to think about that and then talk about it later then. How I can explain it.
Sure.